All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Letter of Law Interviews. My name is Sarthak Bharadwaj, and in the 12th episode of this interview series, I'm absolutely delighted, thrilled, and so very excited to be in conversation with Mr. Mayank Sapra. Mayank sir is a lawyer based out of Delhi. He practices primarily at the Supreme Court, the Delhi High Court, and various other tribunals. Other than that, he also actively takes up a lot of pro bono works and engages with students, such as this conversation, by way of moot courts and a lot of other things. There's a lot more to Sir's professional achievements and credentials, which I'll be happy to talk about later in the interview. But right now, before we start, there's one small little story that I want to share with everyone of how I first met Sir. Back in 2019, I got to do my first ever national moot court competition, where I had the great opportunity to argue before Mayank Sir. And though my performance left much to be desired for, that experience was exhilarating. The way Sir grills you, the way he asks questions, and the way he conducts the entire court, it's the experience of a lifetime, changed my entire perspective on mooting, and I was hooked. And ever since that day, I just knew I had to get Mayank sir on the show. And today we're happy to, I'm doing this. I'm so happy. I'm also very happy that this time I'm the one asking the questions and not sir. So Mayank sir, thank you so much for taking the time out and being here with me.
Thank you so much, Sarthak. I must confess that I was telling this to you earlier, and I think I still maintain that one, this is a great amount of exaggeration about my so-called achievements, because I don't think there are much. And the second part is that in respect of the moot court that you speak of, okay, you must know that you were one of the highest scored participants in that round, at least. So so to be fair, you shouldn't have all this grudge with me.
No, these aren't grudges at all, sir. These. In fact, I was speaking with my other teammates and other people that I met during that mood. Everyone was in awe of you, and I'm sure when this episode comes out, people will be excited to hear your thoughts on this. So let's get started, sir.
Excited.
Yeah. Please go ahead, sir.
Excited, I'm unsure about that, but yeah, surprise for sure. Like, okay.
You're very kind and humble, sir.
Yes.
So to start this off, why don't you introduce yourself to us a little bit? Just how you first got interested in law, what you're doing right now, where you went to law school, and anything that you feel describes who you are.
I see. Basically, I'm a lawyer who ended up being one by accident. It may, in the sense that I was never vying to be a lawyer from the very beginning. And this is something, in the sense that it might sound cliched, and I think I've said it someplace else as well, that I was back in school. So and I was very bad at science, in the sense that till 10th I was doing fine for myself, so much so that my parents were confident hamara bacha IIT. But unfortunately for them, that did not happen, right? And in somewhere in my 12th, I think I realized that I'm just not meant to calculate the elasticity by pulling off a monkey's tail. Okay, so there is this very famous question that comes in physics, and I was very bad at it, that if you are standing beneath a pole, and then there is a monkey on that pole, and it has a tail which is reaching you, if you sort of if you sort of pull the tail of that monkey, basically elasticity of it. Okay, what is the elasticity? How do you calculate the elasticity? Now, very frankly, my question even back then was, am I a fool, okay, to sort of pull the tail of a monkey? The monkey will come and bite me. And I was never able to sort of take out the elasticity or whatever there is. So, so that's how bad I was at science. Now, in respect of going into law school, so it was mostly on account of inspiration by my cousin sister, who by then had joined NUJS Kolkata. So she really encouraged me to take these exams. Of course, in the first shot, I don't remember if I'd missed CLAT or I gave CLAT and I could not clear it. But the second time, because the first year I gave these exams and IP was one of them. In as much as I had the rank to go for Amity and maybe just Amity, but then I ended up in Vivekanand Institute of Professional Studies because it was closer to my house then. And my father said that no, you've got to be very serious about this, and so because if we send you all the way to Noida, but there is every possibility that the bacha bigad jayega. So that's how I did not.
Right. In fact,
So
yeah. Well, that's very interesting. In fact, I was reading in another interview that you did for NLU Odisha's Alumni Association, and just that you before
yes,
moving to NLU, you had a brief stint at VIPS. Now, I am also studying in VIPS, and
yes.
I'm really excited to know how it was like back then in 2008-9. Now, of course, we have a campus and everything, but back then in your time, what was it like? Also, just one more point, you had written
So
that you had a great
yes,
time there. So I really
yes.
want to know how did you have a great time at VIPS? I haven't been able to have it for the last 3 years.
So I'll tell you what. See, uh, it needs to be seen in a context. Okay,
Yeah.
it needs to be seen in a context because I was coming from a background where I had struggled a lot with my subjects. Okay, and I was very excited about law school. Okay, now VIPS. This is in 2008. Okay, so in 2008 it used to have its small campus. It wasn't a campus as such. It used to have some sort of a temporary arrangement in Moti Nagar.
Oh.
Okay, and there used to be the small building which was otherwise before that it was owned by a computer academy, and somehow VIPS got that, and then they had. So I still remember that on the ground floor of VIPS there used to be a go down of DHL.
Okay.
Okay, and it is only from the first floor, second floor, third floor and all that classes used to be held, and you used to have two courses running simultaneously. One was this BJMC, another one was law. And believe me, I had the time of my life, in the sense that I made some really good friends in VIPS, and who are friends till date, by the way,
Wow.
right? Some really great memories, like whatever you like. I actually went in, at least so I presume, I went in as a little mature individual. 5 things not to do when you enter law school. So when I went to NLU Odisha, I knew what 5 things I did not want to do. So so yeah, because there have been well, I'll give you one example.
Sure.
Okay, and it's a very funny example. Others I can't give. Okay, because ultimately we are referring to students, so I
Yeah.
don't want to, if I can't be a role model, let me not be the other way around.
Okay.
So so there was this incident, and Miss Shilpa Babbar Khatri.
Mhm.
Okay, so it was her class. Okay, and I remember distinctly that it was a Friday. Okay, she was teaching us sociology, and some 5-10 minutes before her class, my friends, we all planned, okay, we are going out for a movie. Now some miscommunication took place, and all of us were supposed to meet inside the classroom, and then maybe go. So some of my friends, they ended up going to the car directly. Like, one of my friends had a car, and they ended up going to the car directly. And he gives me a call, where are you, where are you? And I said, no, I'm waiting for you guys. Like, I'm in the car. Like, oh shit. And I immediately start running out, okay, to notice that Miss Khatri is coming in. Okay, and then I had no choice but to return to the classroom. And she could see the disappointment on my face. And believe me, like, I still maintain she is one of the better teachers I've still had the
True.
privilege of studying under, right?
Absolutely.
So so then she looks at me, and she had a very humane quality. Okay. And so going out for some reason, I said, ma'am, maybe, oh, okay, then you please, then you please go. There's no difficulty with that. And I ended up actually going for that movie. That's how shameless we were.
No, but I do agree. I mean, yeah. Go ahead, sir. Sorry, there was some lag. Please go ahead.
I mean, yes. So what I was saying was that that's how the life was at the time, at least in the first few months at Whips, because I often say this, and I've maintained it, that for the first 2-3 months my attendance at Whips was 100%. Like I used to have 100% attendance till the gate.
Wow.
Inside the classroom it was 33%. Okay. So when I say that when I went to NLU Odisha, I was a different person altogether. This is what I mean: 5 things not to do when you enter law school.
Yeah. Makes sense. But then, sir, in NLU Odisha, when you went there, it was a relatively new law school, and
Yes.
the Moot Court Society was still developing. And I was reading how Professor Mustafa, back then when he was the VC there, he handpicked you, and then you became the first ever convener. And now NLU Odisha has a very formidable Moot Court Society. Their teams do really well all across.
Right.
But I really want to know from you, how was it like for you when, there wasn't really a mooting culture in the college and you were setting it up? So how was that like? And you have also mooted across the spectrum. You've done some great moots. So how was your entire mooting experience like in law school?
So I think I'll answer that in 2 parts. The first thing is that, how the mooting culture ultimately got developed. And the second part is how I ended up mooting, right? So, so you see, when we went in, it was obviously, we were the first batch, right? So now, Professor Mustafa is a very dynamic individual, a very dynamic professor. If you ever end up listening to one of his lectures, okay, you realize, how brilliant he is in his subject, right? And almost in most other subjects, to be very fair to him. Now, this whole process actually took place in the sense that they said that, okay, whoever wants to, because it was only one batch at the time. This is 2009, by the way. So he said that, okay, we'll pick up a few individuals, and whoever wants to apply with whatever whatever you feel would be an appropriate CV for this purpose. So you apply along with that. I did that. Now, this is where, by the way, Whips experience comes into picture, because I had done a moot court in Whips by then. Okay. And it was, we had been successful to an extent that I don't know if it was an intercity moot or it was a national moot. I can't remember. I think it's called R.K. Jain Memorial Moot. Okay. And we were runners up.
Wow.
So I don't know if R.K. Jain is or at least at that point was a national level moot, or what is the deal. I can't remember. So I knew how the whole process takes place. Okay. I may be good, I may be bad, but I knew how the process takes place. And this is what I ended up exhibiting before Professor Mustafa, because see, one, it was of course that, he interviewing you personally, asking you why is it that you want to become a convener and what is it that you bring to the table. The second part is you explaining it to the people who are already, who've already become members of the moot court, moot court committee by then. It wasn't named formally by then. And then by a show of hands, a convener was chosen. And that's how I came to be the convener.
Okay.
Right. And then, insofar as the culture is concerned, to be very honest with you, we try to develop, of course, what we could in terms of, sort of encouraging people and talking about moots. And because the convener himself was doing moots, okay, that may have played a very small role to that, if this fool can do it, then maybe we can do it. Okay. So that may have played some sort of a role. I can't guarantee you, of course, but yes, I mean, it's quite conceivable that may have played some sort of a role. But I have to tell you that at the time I had great support from the then secretary, Ms. Shraddha Gupta, who of course was a fantastic student back then, and she's a fantastic lawyer today, right? And it was it could not have been done without her support at the time. So yeah, I mean, that's of course the first part. The second part is with respect to how I ended up mooting, is probably because of my interest, general interest, in the sense that I was very fond of this one particular exercise that I had done in VIPS. Is this whole going through the documents, maybe devising this interplay between law and facts, and maybe getting a chance to argue. All these things were something that would really encourage me, or really give me a kick at the time, at least, right? It still happens, of course, but only with respect to mooting, it really was something that would that would attract me towards it. So I ended up doing close to 10 moots back in law school, right? And there were occasions when I had done 2 moots in a semester, or maybe two
Wow.
moots. I think there was one occasion. I'm sorry, I do not have the gift of a very good memory, but it could be 2 moots in one semester, or I think it was 2 moots in one semester.
Oh, wow.
so so yeah, I mean, that's how I ended up doing. And with every team, with every moot, you're learning something. And if you so much as end up crossing some sort of a hurdle, right? So you reach the quarters, because the first moot we did, we couldn't really reach anywhere, right? And this was NLU Delhi Court Law moot, and we were given to understand like about 10 days before the moot was actually, the submission was to take place.
Okay.
So I represented the first team ever that went out of NLUO. And but it was naturally, it was a brilliant experience that I had. But then we had very little time at hand. So yeah, I mean, that's the sum and substance. I ended up with a mood, by the way. I ended up doing GH Raisoni with a couple of very good friends, and one of the friends ended up winning best speaker. So I
Wow.
think so I was happy that we ended up on a high,
Yeah.
if nothing.
No, that's wonderful. And then, sir, post law school, you dived right into litigation. So
Yes.
I'm curious to know, how did the decision to litigate come about? Did mooting have a role in it, or were your internships to played a role in it? So how did you decide to litigate? Because from what I see, generally the culture in NLUs is that most students go for a corporate job. Now, that might not be accurate, but what was it for you? How did you choose litigation?
So to be very honest with you, the very reason that I went to an NLU is solely on account of getting that job that you just spoke about.
Okay.
Okay. So that was my initial so to say that was something that I was looking forward to, right? However, during the course of my internships, and I ended up working with some very fantastic people, right? So I did an internship with an advocate on record, because that was one internship in the very first year, by the way, because one of my professors saw my interest in constitutional law, and he said that uh, sorry, am I audible to you properly?
Yes, yes, sir. There's just some lag, but now it's all right. Yeah, yeah. So you're audible.
Okay. So uh, so yeah, as I was telling you that I ended up doing that internship, and the prof told me that I have a friend who who is an advocate on record, and maybe I could refer you to him. So I was very happy, because it was coming from Professor Yogesh Pratap Singh, right?
Okay.
Who was very till very recently the registrar of NLU, and he is one of the most regarded professors in constitutional law across the country, not only at NLU. So thereafter, I ended up interning with a gentleman who used to have his primary practice in the district courts and the high court, right? And thereafter, I interned with firms, but even then, I interned with the litigation wing. I was by then I don't know why, but I had developed this inclination that this part of the field probably interests me a lot more, right? Now, mind you, till this point, I'd not made up my mind whether I want to dive into, the core litigation, as in joining a chamber practice. I was more of the opinion that, I want to be in the litigation wing of a firm and, do litigation and at the same time make my money.
Yeah.
So that was the idea that I had in mind at the time. Now, while I was interning at Amarchand, then I got like 3 internships, because on one internship led to another one led to another one. So I was reaching that point where I would have gotten a PPO, right? But when they ended up asking me, so do you want to work here? I don't know why it naturally came out that, sir, I'm still exploring my options, and I think that's where I lost the PPO. I can't be 100% sure on this. Once again, it's just hunch, but that's how I like to believe that, that's the reason why it never happened. And so, yeah, I mean, and so by the time I graduated, I had been working with Amarchand, like 3 internships is, 3 opportunities gone in that sense, right? So I had only worked with one more firm, which was Indraneel Ghosh and Associates. Once again, started off by a former Fox Bundle partner. And sir is an extremely kind mentor. Like I got to do drafting. Okay. And so I'm sorry. I mean, I think I'm digressing a bit.
No, please go ahead. It's okay. That's the whole point of this freewheeling conversation.
So I had the benefit of, Mr. Samiran Borkateki, who was then a senior associate or a principal associate, I can't remember. And once again, a fantastic mentor, and who I can easily say is a very dear friend. Okay. Of course, Mr. Ghosh, I can't say he's a friend, but he's certainly a mentor in that regard. So I was given multiple opportunities to draft, and that sort of strengthened my resolve that, okay, I want to do litigation for sure. That's for sure. The only problem was that even after 5 years, I didn't have a job. So, it was ridiculous, because my father looked at me and, have you seen Gangs of Wasseypur by any chance?
Yeah. I have.
Right. So my father looked at me the same way as Ramadhir Singh looks at Jeffy. And with the exception of, he holding my chin, he said, "Beta, tumhara lachhan bilkul theek nahi lag rahe, hame tumse na ho payega." So that was the problem, because 5 years spent, 3 internships at Amarchand, 2 at IG and Associates, and yet the chap does not have a job. How foolish can this chap be? So that happened. And then luckily Samiran was approached by somebody who told that there was a vacancy at Mr. Arun Kumar Verma's chambers, right? And Mr. Verma eventually went on to become a senior counsel. So he was a counsel of repute by then, right? And so I interviewed with Mr. Verma, and he seemed very happy at the time, and so I joined his chambers immediately. And it made a lot more sense, because by then I had developed my inclination towards arbitration, and Mr. Verma had a lot of work pertaining to arbitration. So yes, so that's how I ended up in litigation.
That's wonderful, sir. And so, okay, now I get a sense of how you ended up at this particular chamber. But, now with the benefit of hindsight, if you were to give some advice to young law students who are thinking of, developing a chamber practice and they're looking for a chamber to join in, so how should someone go about choosing a chamber? Because I understand for litigation, that's very important, where you get your start.
See, Sarthak, I'll tell you what, even before joining Mr. Verma, I had done my research, okay, in the the sense of, what all matters does Mr. Verma have? And this is before going for the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because see, ultimately, if you're applying to any chamber, okay, you need to know what does the said gentleman or ma'am do.
Yeah.
Correct. So one is that. The second thing is, what what is it that, if someone else has interned in their chamber, maybe someone else has worked in their chamber, then you speak to them. I did that exercise to know that, you know what is sir's expectation from an intern, or what is sir's expectation from a junior. Right, it could have been, and obviously you'll have to look for a former junior. Maybe a current junior may not be in that position to be able to give you that kind of a frank opinion, so you look for a former junior. And I got in touch with a couple of them, and they all told me that, sir's idea of working was based on two things: that, I can condone, foolishness. I cannot condone callousness. Okay. So he would not condone irresponsible behavior. He could condone foolishness, because, while when you've just entered the profession, you are bound to make those mistakes. So Mr. Verma, on my first day, by the way, he taught me this, and he told me that if you want to learn something in my chamber, it's best that you shadow my clerk, because the more you shadow the clerk, the more you know about the various filing procedures. And at some point, the clerk will tell you about saab ko kya pasand hai aur saab ko kya pasand nahi. Now, of course, the second part Mr. Verma never told me, but in the hindsight, I do realize that, this is the reason why he ended up telling me this, that go after the clerk. If nothing else, kam se kam filing seekh jao.
Right.
So I suggest this to everybody, that if you're joining, it could be, it could be for a firm, it could be for, an in-house position, it could be for chambers, anything. My idea is that do a little more research, speak to people about them, try and understand what is the kind of work they do, how is it that they, usually react to be your to people your age. If it, at times people have this thing that, they don't want to take people, say, who've just crossed from law school, or maybe, there are some chambers who have that policy, right? So you need to understand that and just get some sort of a background, and then go in for that interview. When you apply, you must have the armory of all of this, so that you can put 1-2 instances of how you can be beneficial to that office in your application. Right. So that's my suggestion, and that goes on for, as in, that goes well for internship as well as a job, job application.
Wonderful. So thank you for that really comprehensive answer. That has a lot of actionable advice laced in there. So, sir, next question is, now you've been an independent counsel for over 2 years, if I understand correctly. So
Yes.
how did you decide to go independent, and when do you think is the right time for a lawyer to go independent and set up his or her own practice?
Okay. So I'll tell you one thing before I answer that. As a lawyer, in the course of my practice, I have somehow developed this way or modus operandi of thinking in tranches. So once again, I'd like to answer this question in two parts.
Yes.
Okay. So the first part would be that, that what is it that, why, how did I end up going independent? That's one. And what are the things that person should keep in mind before going independent? Okay. So now, you see, Supreme Court, at least, or, these days most courts have this concept of list of dates. Okay. So the story needs some sort of a completion. Okay. It's that list of dates where you put in dates and relevant events in a chronological order. So I would like to, utilize that particular drafting skill that one has developed. So before I went independent, I had the privilege of joining Miss Aparna Bhatt's chambers. Okay, so I didn't want to miss out this particular date for a particular reason. Okay, and I'll come to that. You'll realize that. So So when I joined her chamber, and mind you, this is after 2 years of my practice, and she's an AOR in the Supreme Court. Okay. Now, she interviewed me in a car because her Supreme Court matter ended, and she was running to CAT, and as in CAT is Central Administrative Tribunal. So the Supreme Court and Central Administrative Tribunal are, some 5 minutes away from each other, right? It's in the same area in that sense. So she interviewed me in her car, and she asked me a few questions and etc etc. Then I got to working in her chambers. Now there's a very interesting incident because her chambers uh, are when you work with an AOR, and somebody who has that kind of an extensive practice as Ms. Bhatt does, uh, few things that you need to keep in mind is that going from maybe and by the way, with Mr. Verma's office, I had been exposed to original side practice, right? So now I'm at the appellate stage. Okay. So this appeal portion is a very different ball game. As in Supreme Court is a very different ball game altogether, because Ms. Bhatt, probably within my second day or the third day, said that, Mayank, I've seen your work, okay, and you'll have to forget your old ways of drafting, and maybe try and develop a new way. And so I wasn't really sure what is she referring to. Then she actually sat me down to tell me that, okay, you prepare list of dates, okay, and do it. And she gave me some file, and she said that you'd start drafting the list of dates, and then you put down your list of dates. Then you make sure that based on that list of dates you make your SLP, right, which is the special leave petition. And Ms. Bhatt is a very renowned human rights lawyer, right? But the so human rights has this thing that at least I was attracted to it. I used to love the kind of work she would do. Maybe it could be something as simple as challenging a particular ordinance, okay, in respect of preventing meat suppliers from selling their product. Okay, there was an ordinance somewhere in between. It was brought in, and it was put to challenge, etc. Now I remember somebody coming to Ms. Bhatt's office, and Ms. Bhatt is a vegetarian, and I'm an exact opposite of that. So I eat everything under the sun. But so that chap is explaining, and by then he's had an opportunity to speak to me, and I'd explained him that I've gone through your papers, etc etc. That is how generally an office would work. So I've told him, and he was very impressed that okay, Mayankji is doing a good job, etc etc. Okay, excellent. He goes to Ms. Bhatt, and he's like, Madam, I want to pursue this because I am really I have a soft corner for animals. Okay, so I want that these regulations should come in, and that ordinance had been passed. Eventually they would have been converted into some sort of regulation. So they said that no, I want the regulations to be there, because I really cannot tolerate when animals get killed. And Aparna ma'am is looking at me because she knows that she is a vegetarian. This chap is certainly a vegetarian, okay, maybe even a vegan, and I am not one. And while he's telling about his soft corner, he's saying Mayankji has done a very good job. So finally, ma'am was compelled to tell him that, see, Mr. So and so, I can't remember his name now. Mr. So and so, I have to be very candid with you. I am a vegetarian, and yes, I'll be the one arguing the matter. But then, this chap that you're praising, okay, he's a hardcore non-vegetarian. And before you came in, I saw him eating prawns. Okay, so you please be assured, he said. And then he got he got a shock of his life, like, because I had told him that this is the sum and substance of your case, and it had some narratives that were required to be developed. So he's like, okay, ma'am, I think Mayankji is competent. We'll go ahead with him as long as we get the work done. There is no difficulty. So
Wow.
that's something that that is something that I learned from her. That two, three things, as a matter of fact. One was that when you're dealing with human rights matters, okay, you have a far greater responsibility. And by the way, because when you end up doing human rights, there is a good possibility that you do not end up getting paid by the client, right? So that also happens, because so to give you some sort of an example, uh, I'm not sure if you recollect this, but there was this movie that came out with Deepika Padukone, and there was a huge controversy about it. Lakshmi, I don't know, I forgot the name of the movie though, where she plays the role of an acid attack victim.
Okay,
This
I've
was
seen it.
right.
Yeah.
So, ma'am had represented the original, the original acid attack victim, and that is what led to prohibition of hydrochloric acid and other harmful acids across over the counter,
I
right?
see.
Now with victims like that, naturally you can't expect any money coming in, right? So she would always tell me that, look, the responsibility towards human rights, and in a human rights matter, towards somebody who's not paying you is always greater than somebody who's paying you. Okay, because, and there is a reason for that, because when somebody pays you, they feel that, okay, now some sort of a contract has been entered and I have some sort of a right or remedy against you. For somebody who's not paid you, okay, is always living in the guilt that that she never asked for any money. So there is no particular question or reason as to why I want to question her or her modus operandi or the way in which she's conducting the
I
case.
understand. Yeah.
So I feel that's where, and by then, I as in, people would approach me, right, that if you can maybe appear here or something, and so this is something very interesting. uh, two, since 2014 till 2018, right, I almost made the similar amount. Okay, so like there was no increment in my paycheck in that
Okay.
sense, for the only reason that uh, when I started off with my career, I was working with a hardcore commercial lawyer. I transitioned into a chamber, which was a human rights practice, right? So for good 4 years, the kind of money I made was all approximately, at par with each other, despite there being a substantial increase in seniority or whatever that you may want to call it, at least in experience, not seniority.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, sorry, coming back to, what I actually wanted to say was that, so I kind of got into this when people started approaching me. Instead of asking for a hike, I requested ma'am that, look, please don't give me a hike. Okay, but what you do is, please allow me some time, okay, to sort of do my own matters. So for example, if we were supposed to leave the office at, say, X time, okay, if I happen to have a particular matter where, say, somebody needs to be briefed or something is required to be done, then please allow me that, and I'll let you know in advance. And she was very kind. Okay, so she was very kind, and she said, okay, I have no problems, you please do that. If you're getting matters, then you do it. And this happened in 2017, by the way.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, that was broadly the start of where it came to me that maybe I could go independent, because I was able to handle the matters independently, right? And of course, there is a story as to how I ended up establishing an independent practice. I'm not saying establishing, I'm just saying that at least laying the foundation stone for an independent practice. Of course, there is a story after that as well. So yeah, I mean,
No, I
that's
get it. Yeah, please go ahead.
so maybe that was the first part. The second part, that maybe I can tell you, that how people should end up going for an independent practice. uh, Let me take a cue from one of these interviews that I had seen, where Mr. Gopal Sankar Narayanan
Oh,
had
of
been
course.
interviewed. Right? So it's the show called the One Take Show, right?
Yeah,
I'm sure you're
Kaustubh's my
aware.
friend.
Right.
Kaustubh's my
So
friend. Yeah.
Kaustav, yes. So I was watching that, and I saw that Mr. Sankar Narayanan, he's a senior counsel and very fine guy once again, and he's very well regarded. At least in, I know this for a fact that people junior to him have great. I'm sure that people senior to him have far greater regard, but I know this for a fact that he's very well regarded because he's very humble and he's very, he talks to you in a very brilliant manner. And I think one of the reasons I got that confidence to be able to to be able to eventually develop some sort of a practice is also on account of Mr. Sankar Narayan. He has some role to play in that.
Wow.
But anyway, having said that, he said that, look here, don't be in a hurry to establish your independent practice, because there is only one test, and I stand by that. And the test is that when you feel that you have enough number of clients, okay, and I add a little, maybe you have enough number of clients to to make you go to the court on a daily basis. That was his test. I add something more to that, which is that, and when you get this feeling that you're not able to do justice to your current chamber anymore, is when you should decide to leave that. Okay.
Wow.
So that's my two-pronged test, right? That you have enough work to keep you busy, okay, and you know that by having that work and by doing that work, okay, you won't be able to do justice to your current seniors chambers anymore. So that's what I feel, and that in fact would lead to an answer to your other question, that how many years do you think. Now mind you, Mr. Sankar Narayanan, to his own admission, and he was junior to Mr. KK Venugopal, who's the current Attorney General, no less, right? So when he went independent, he said that it took me 10 years.
Wow.
I went independent after 4 years. The reasons were by and large similar. Okay. The reasons were probably similar, that you reach that point where people are approaching you, they want to entrust you with their respective cases, and that you have some sort of you have that idea of that now I'm unfortunately unable to do justice to my to current sir or ma'am's chambers. So I mean, yes, that's of course that that test that I feel people should apply. uh, in respect of the other thing, that what all things that people should keep in mind while going independent, maybe one, when you're going independent, just be sure of your finances, okay, because you see, when I say it and Mr. Sankar Narayan says it, there is some difference, because when he says it out of his own experience, I say it out of my own experience, right? So this whole portion of litigation, you have to be sure that there is that you're disciplined enough, okay, that you're disciplined enough, you have some sort of a schedule on a daily basis, because it's very easy, and there is this romanticism associated with going independent, right? After about 3-4 years, 5 years in the profession, you'll find that X person is earning this much in a law firm, okay, and it
Yeah.
becomes apparent by the way the things they carry, the how the kind of matters they appear in, all of that stuff. And of course you have a general knowledge about how much a senior associate in a tier 1 firm earns. So it's only natural for people to get that feeling that, okay, maybe I should go independent right away. There's a lot of romanticism associated with it, mind you. The only thing is that make sure that you have enough finances, because this is, as one of my friends puts it, that this is like sowing a seed for a mango tree. The results are only going to become apparent after 15-20 years, not before that.
Yeah.
So 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 while your friends are earning big bucks, you'll just have to sort of make your peace with the fact that you're doing work, and if you like your work, okay. So that's how I feel. I think these are things that I feel should be kept in mind while you're going independent, of course.
Right. Again, this is again very actionable advice, especially that two-part test. It's like a court laying down a doctrine effectively. So that's quite usable. So moving
If
forward,
Mr. Sankar Narayanan becomes, if Mr. Sankar Narayanan were to become a judge, I'm very sure that he's going to lay it down at some point.
of course, no, I don't doubt that. So because we are running out of time, I'll quickly come to the final set of the questions that I have. Of course, I'd have loved to cover a lot more. I'm really enjoying this conversation, but just two more questions, sir. The first one is that you talked about how in your first practice you were working on the original side, and then later on it was appeal work. But someone who has just become a lawyer and he or she eventually wants to practice either at the Supreme Court level or at the High Court, perhaps they don't want to really go into the trial courts. And yet I've often heard people say that the experience of arguing at the trial court, not just the original side, is very important. So what is your opinion on this? If someone eventually does want to practice at the appeal level, and maybe he or she wants to work
Yes.
towards becoming a senior counsel also, later on in their lives, what should be the trajectory for them?
So my view on this is that uh, choose your path, okay, in the sense that I always felt that it is better that one has an idea about the original side first. Okay. So original side would, it could be original side of the High Court or you practicing before the trial courts, because this slight difference between the two, right?
Yeah.
And uh, it's important that you get to know of it, because there are some small nitty-gritties which I feel would be very helpful to you at the appellate level. Okay. So to give you some example, okay, as in this is an actual example of a case that I was assisting my former senior with, right? And this was a case pertaining to a custodial death,
Oh,
right? So 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 there was a writ petition that had been filed in the Gujarat High Court, and it was pertaining to a custodial death, and ultimately nothing came out of it. And then they wanted to file an SLP.
hmm,
Now, unfortunately, before the in that writ petition, okay, in that writ petition, they had not sort of extensively covered grounds as to how these people were found dead under suspicious circumstances. Now, I had a chat about this, and I was working on this, and I was unable to ascertain what are the grounds that one can possibly make out of this. Now, a friend of mine who had done some criminal law, okay, and I by then I had not done enough criminal law, right? I don't say that even now I have, but then I have at least an idea about how the whole thing works.
hmm,
So who had done some criminal law, and had worked on a similar issue, told me about this book uh, by book on medical jurisprudence by Modi. Okay, I don't know what's it called, KK Modi or whatever it's called, PN Modi or whatever. Now, when I went through that book, okay, the first thing that when I saw was that if and in that matter they had said that, look, uh, uh, you know they had strangled themselves, okay, against something that was there available with them, maybe the dari or something, and they had strangled them. So basically the police in Gujarat had made out a case for suicide by those people. Now I went through that entire book, okay, just to be able to go through and understand what exactly happened. So if somebody, if you do it yourself, okay, there is a different kind of mark, okay, there's a very different kind of mark, and I had a very similar expression that you have right now, okay, because when I read it for the first time I had a very similar expression that there is a different kind of mark, because the pull is going to be very different, as opposed to when somebody puts you, okay, and then tries to pull it from up. And I took that as a ground, okay, and notice issued, of course. And by after I left the office, I was given to understand, unfortunately I could not continue working on that case, but then I was given to understand that eventually they were granted a compensation of some 20 lakhs or so. Now this is where it becomes very important that you have that trial experience, because frankly speaking, it was one of the first few criminal matters that I was dealing with. Okay. But, at the trial level, if somebody has seen all of this, maybe seen this, and, because then this is what turned out to be some sort of a game changer for us at the appellate level.
Yeah.
Right. I'll give you one more example that, if you've probably done something at the trial level, and all the stages that take place in CPC. Okay. Now, for whatsoever reason, say if one particular stage is not followed, okay, and many people end up missing that. If you take that as a ground, there is a good likelihood that your appeal will get admitted. Okay. And at times, people at the appellate level have no idea. I'm not saying everybody is like that, but I'm saying that people at the appellate level at times have no idea about, what are those stages, or what is it that has been missed out. And I know I've seen that, how my trial court experience at least really helps me in drafting an appeal before the High Court, or even an SLP for that matter. So to put it in context and to sort of sum it up, I think I suggest that, maybe first 2 years, if they can be spent at the trial level, okay, maybe, one would have that experience, and then you choose, whether you want to work exclusively at the appellate level, or you want to work exclusively at the trial level, or you want to sort of develop a practice across all the three forums. At least that way you have some sort of an opportunity.
Right.
Because Supreme Court practice is something that is really attractive. So is High Court practice. The only practice that is probably not that attractive is the District Court practice. So don't rule it out, is all I say. Maybe the viewers of this channel can sort of uh, take some cue from it and act accordingly. Yeah, that's all.
Right. So, sir, one question that I always ask people who are litigating and when they come on my channel, because most of the viewers who watch this are primarily students. Now that you are an independent counsel, I'm sure you handle a lot of interns. So, what are your expectations from an intern, that when they're joining your chamber, what are some things they do that you definitely like, and then what are some things that you do that make you feel this isn't working out? What are your thoughts on that?
So I'll tell you what, Sarthak, I have never considered myself to be one of those inherently talented people, right? So I've always believed that if at all, if people are entrusting you with their matters, is probably because I'm working, okay, and I'm working and I'm trying to be honest with my work. I'm not saying I'm hard working or I'm smart working or what is the deal, but I'm saying I try and remain honest to my work, right? Now, that I feel is a very important quality insofar as an internship application in my office is concerned, that you have to be very honest to your work. Sincerity and dedication, and I don't look for anything beyond that. I, a lot of times the colleges end up approaching me and then they ask that, sir, if you have some preference that you want a fourth year or a fifth year or a third year or a second year. I said that, look, if learning has to happen, it'll happen at every level, because, and I know this for a fact, because I am somebody who ended up working with an AOR in the very first year, which to a lot of people seemed very surprising. But I know that, there was enough work in that office, and I ended up doing a lot of good work. I'm not saying that and immediately after that, I did trial work, of course. So I feel that as long as these three qualities are intact, uh, I don't think there should be any impediment with. And, insofar as my office is concerned, I generally try and not take more than 2 interns, right? Because that way, I can sort of give them personal attention. I can speak to them, and they are treated like, junior colleagues. So you're not an intern in that sense, because, one would, at least in my office, one would end up doing some sort of drafting, maybe preparing a note, maybe preparing, everything that somebody that another junior colleague would be expected to do. I think the interns in my office get that opportunity, of course, depending upon how much they are able to grasp, and what is the what is their attitude towards the work that is being entrusted to them. So that is something that is, of course, with respect to my expectation. In response to that other question that you asked, that what are the things that that sort of put you off, right? So my only suggestion is that, look, uh, you know, make sure that you read up about me. Okay, if me or anybody for that matter, just end up reading up about their practice, do that research. So I take you back to that, you know that that thing that I had spoken to you about. It's like one of those things that stand-up comics like to do. It's called callback.
Callback.
Okay, right? So yeah, I mean, uh, do your research. If you're interested in this person's practice, okay, please go ahead and make your application accordingly. Now, if you come to me and say, sir, I am interested in I don't know, tax laws, okay, and I feel that your chamber will give me a great opportunity, okay, to do amazing work in tax laws. The problem with that approach is that my office doesn't do any tax matter. I have never worked on a single tax matter till date, right? Now, this is the situation today, and neither do I claim to be a tax lawyer. So there is no point that you waste your time and mine in this entire process. And maybe the second part is that if you approach somebody in on LinkedIn, just make that attempt to at least go through their profiles, because there I have had people contacting me on LinkedIn saying, sir, we want internship. Excellent. And they'll say that after we want internship, they'll say that this is XYZ reason that I want to intern. I said, okay, do one thing. Please make an application to the relevant email address, and I'll consider that. The pat comes the next question, sir, what is your email ID? Now the problem is that if you do that very basic research, it's available. You just need to look at it. Okay, and it is the case, and this is not only with me, this is the case with a lot of people. Okay, students, for some reason, they don't end up going through the entire profile, so they don't have the benefit. Then there are people who somehow catch hold of my number, and they message me, that, sir, we are looking for internship. And then depending on that particular day, I would respond. At times there is some delay at my end, of course. So there are people who come back to me with the same message, we want internship, and then they sort of put it, and then they put a question mark in the next message. No reply, question mark. So no response, question mark. And that is something that really infuriates me, because I am not obligated to answer every message that I receive. So one finds it very, very difficult. And maybe the third aspect is that it's conceivable that for somebody who's as forgetful as I am, maybe I miss out on not responding to you for either of the two reasons. That one, I've seen your application but I've forgotten to respond, or maybe because I have just not had the time to apply myself to your application. Either way, give it, say, about 7-10 days. If you do not get a response, you write a reminder email. Nobody is going to kill you for that. Nobody is going to reprimand you. If somebody who's reprimanding you for something as simple as that, then don't go and intern with them, no matter how great they are. Simple. Because that human touch is always going to be required, and at least in this side of the profession, you please be assured that human touch is required. So yeah, and that's
Great.
that's pretty much about it.
Great. Wonderful. So, sir, just final question, and this is something that I ask everyone who's ever been on my show, because I get all my learnings mostly from books. I really enjoy reading, and I did see earlier, before I requested you to come slightly closer to the camera, there was a really neat-looking bookshelf behind you. So I just want to know, what have you been reading, and if you have any suggestions for all our viewers. It could be anything.
So Sarthak, so the bookshelf that you see is because my wife is a bibliophile, right? And and we keep having fights as regards her part of the shelf and my part of the shelf, because uh, I like to read books pertaining to political science, history, and fictions. Sorry, non-fictions. Okay, and she is very fond of everything under the sun, and she is very fond of fictions. Right. So this bookshelf that you see has been divided into two parts. The first part is mostly fiction. Second part is mostly non-fiction. And my favorite genre, I believe, is autobiographies of legal luminaries. Right. I really like to read them. I'm very fond of them. But my wife introduced me to this very interesting book, and I've been reading it for some time now. Right. It's called The Last Maharani. It is based on it's by Chitra Devarukuni. Right.
Okay.
And it's been written. She's the last Maharani in the sense that or the last queen, I think it's called the last queen, right? So she is the youngest queen of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and this whole story has been narrated from her point of view.
I see.
What is it, what all things did she have to come across, what were the hurdles, etc., etc. And that, because Maharaja Ranjit Singh, this is the last time that Kohinoor was ever seen in India. After that, it was taken away by the British. So, and she is the only person who claims that this Kohinoor was supposed to be given to the Jagannath temple in Puri.
Mm.
So that is, so, it's been written from her perspective, and it's a very wonderful book. It's one of the most beautiful fictions that I've ever come across.
Lovely. Thanks for
So,
this great recommendation, sir. And I think with
so
this we can. Oh, sorry, you were saying something.
no, I think that's pretty much about it.
Okay, wonderful. No, wonderful. And I think with this we can sort of wrap today's conversation. It was an absolute pleasure, Mayank sir, to speak with you, and I had so much fun. I wish we can, we wish we could go on for long, but we do have to stop at some point. Otherwise, the
I
viewers are going
appreciate that.
to... No, I get it. But thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking with me. I really had a lot of fun talking with you, and I hope the same goes for you.
Thank you so much. I really had a lot of fun. I think I've discussed my law school after a very long time, and I really had a lot of fun talking to you, Sarthak. And to be fair, as I told you earlier, I do follow your channel, and I really like I can easily say that I have been a fan of the channel. So
Thank you.
I mean,
That's so
it's
kind of you.
really a pleasure to coming on the same channel where I follow, and maybe I can see myself at someday. So
That's so kind of you, sir. That's so kind of you. And I think with this, I will stop recording then. Thank you once again.